So by now, hopefully you've understood that they're taking you through one small step at a time in order to create this game. Up until this point, you've made your sprites, you've put some animations on them, and you've had the ladybug start moving across the screen. So now you need to figure out if the enemies get all the way across to the cake, you should place them back at the left side of the screen and decrease the score. To start, you'll write code for only one of your enemies, and then we'll add it for the second one. So you're going to, inside the enemies touch cake function, you need to write code that checks when a ladybug is touching the cake, resets its position, and changes the score. Half of this you've already done before. So you're going to use an if and is touching to detect whether the enemy 1 has touched the cake. And so then inside of that code, you're going to set the enemy 1's X position back to 0. You're going to set enemy 1's Y position to a random number between 150 and 250. And then finally, you're going to use the counter pattern to decrease the score by 2. So these first two, you've already done when you set the enemy 1 in motion here at the beginning of the level. We're just going to take these two lines here. Since we've already written them, we're going to highlight them. So this resets the X position, and it resets the Y position. Now, many of you may have noticed for this lesson, I've transitioned to the text option instead of you continuing to use the blocks. And so I'm sorry if you're still holding on to the blocks, but I'm doing this because I'm trying to force you to start using text, because if you're going to be more advanced coding, they use text. They don't use the blocks like we've been using. So I'm also narrating everything that I'm doing, and so hopefully you can follow along and do the same thing on your computer. So I'm just going to right-click, and I'm going to say copy, or you could do Control-C as well. So I'm going to copy these two lines of code inside of my enemies touch cake function. But first, I'm going to do an if statement. I'm going to say if my enemy 1 is touching my cake, then that's where I'm going to put these two lines of code. So Control V to paste, or right click and select paste. And then the other thing we need to do is remember our counter pattern. So counter pattern is we set something equal to itself, and then we add or subtract something from it. So score equals score, in this case -2. We're taking 2 off every time that first enemy gets to the cake. So reset, run. My alien guy, of course, is doing nothing at this point. I haven't put any code in for him. And once one of those hits, it then resets back to the beginning and decreases my score by 2. So that's all you got to do for this puzzle. It's just those 5 lines or so. So we're going to finish number 9, continue on to 10, and you can pretty much guess what they're going to have you do here. You're going to repeat the code for enemy 2. And in fact, they even tell you to copy the line of code that you've already made. Okay, so coders oftentimes work smarter, not harder. So first enemy sprite should now be resetting when it gets to the cake. Now you want to do the other ladybug to reset as well. So inside the function, you should have the code that resets enemy 1. So copy the entire if statement you wrote on the last level. Place the code inside of enemies touch cake function just below the last one, Control V, and then change the name of the sprite from enemy 1 to enemy 2. So this also really works best if you are in text mode. So we're going to highlight here this if enemy 1 is touching cake, and then we're going to right click and say copy, and then push enter and right click and say paste. And bada bing, we now have 2 sets of code that are exactly the same. So we're going to change it to be enemy 2 instead of enemy 1, decrease the score again. And so now every time the 2 ladybugs go through, we're going to be losing 4 points because it's 2 for each one. And they're both going at the exact same speed, exact same time. So they're both going to hit every single time and just be reassigned to a random location. Okay? So we got that done, and then we move on to puzzle 11. So now you can notice we've used the same lines of code at 2 points in the program. You're going to set the enemies on the left-hand side at the beginning, and then later in the enemies touch cake function. So what they want you to do now is to create 2 new functions to reset each of your 2 enemies and remove this repetition from your program. This will make your program easier to read, allow you to change it more easily, and allow you to quickly reset your sprites at other points in your program if you need to, which we're going to need to, because you need to be able to push the enemy off into the water, and that's going to reset the enemy back to the beginning as well. So we might as well just go ahead and do this painful making of the new functions now instead of having to worry about it later. So at the bottom of your program, create 2 new functions, setEnemy1 and setEnemy2. Inside each of these functions, place the code that sets the enemies on the left side of the screen and gives them a random Y position. Whenever the code for setEnemy1 and setEnemy2 appears in the program, replace them with a call to the functions you just created. So to create a new function, we have to type in the word function. So underneath enemies touch cake, that's where it's just where I'm going to put it so you can see it. Function setEnemy1. We put parentheses, and then we put a bracket, not a page down, a bracket. Okay, and this is now the new function that I'm defining. So working smarter, not harder, I am going to just take this code right here. Since I need to get rid of it anyway, I'm just going to cut it. So I can just right click and say cut, or Control X if you will. And then I'm going to paste it right in here. Okay, and then I'm going to take all of that code and I'm going to Control C. And I'm going to Control V because I need to make another one for enemy 2. And I just take and eliminate the 1, change it to a 2. And those are my 2 new functions. So now, wherever in my code I'm resetting these positions, I'm going to say setEnemy1. And I put the parentheses and the semicolon, so this calls my function as opposed to what it was doing before, which was defining the function. Just going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it here and change that to a 2. And then we go back to the beginning, and we highlight here, and I paste again, and highlight here, and paste again. But I'm going to change that to setEnemy2. Okay, so now when I run, you can see they're going to go across, and the same thing's going to happen. I haven't really changed any of my code. I just made it a little easier to understand and broke it up some more. So each time the ladybugs get to the cake, I get -2 for each of them, and then they get reset back to the beginning. Okay, now we are done with the number 11. Congratulations, you made it through. Hoping that you're understanding the things that I've been doing, and in the next video, we'll continue with 12.